I have been searching.
Welcome to Following the Fire. Thanks for joining us on this journey through the wilderness. Just like Israel followed the pillar of fire and smoke, we want to take a new look at our beliefs and just follow him.
And like Israel, we get it wrong a lot, we get lost a lot, but we're doing our best to go where God leads us. I'm Nathan.
And I'm Steve.
Don't you know it's all I have?
Welcome to the podcast, Nathan.
Hello. How's it going?
I just never know how to start these things.
Me neither. Yeah.
We are starting now.
It's hard for me because I'll jump into podcast voice when we're just talking, and then I'll realize, like, oh, I could have been more open and and raw.
Well, you sound different because the beard's gone. So it's kind of like podcast voice all the time, maybe. I don't know.
It's weird, yeah. It just goes straight out of my face now.
No filter.
No filter. Oh, no. And I'm already a wheat, so the filter is already pretty weak.
You guys do have kind of a different filter, I will say.
We do. We have confidence. I think that's what it is.
Is it is it good confidence?
I don't know if it's, I'm not going to place a judgment.
It's just a lot of it.
Yeah. But if you're confident, then you can, this is what happens to 95-year-old people. They're like, I don't care what you think of me. Like, I know who I am. So I don't care how high I wear these sweatpants. Like, I'm going to wear them where I want to wear them. And if that offends you, then that's your fault. Because I know who I am. This is what I like. So I think it's mostly that.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, okay. It's okay if you don't like me. I'll still say what I think or what I'm thinking. And then the second part of it is disagreeability. Is that the word?
Agreeability. Is it?
No,
agreeableness?
Yeah, agreeableness, but the opposite of that.
Use a negative number.
Yeah. So Malcolm Gladwell, Revisionist History podcast, has a whole episode about that, which is where I borrowed that from. But we are, as a family, probably more, I think that's the word. Now I think I'm getting it wrong.
Disagreeable?
Disagreeable than most, which means if everyone was going left, but we saw a good reason for going right, we would go right.
Yeah.
An agreeable person will go left if everyone else is going left, you know, even if they maybe feel that they should go right.
Yeah, I think I kind of developed a little bit of that in Germany, just because the German people are in general. I mean, it's kind of a jokey stereotype, but it's true that they tend to be more just like right out there.
They are, yeah. I work with most of the people who are not Americans that I work with are Germans, and they are direct, especially in Europe.
Yeah,
and have that.
I prefer
disagreeable.
Anyway, I don't find it disagreeable. I would rather you tell me that you have a problem with me than like just letting it fester for 30 years.
That's a superpower that my dad has, that my grandma probably had, which is like, if you are a complete stranger but you have a thing on your tooth, or like a stain on your shirt, or a little piece of toilet paper on your foot, he's going to tell you, which I think is a supreme value that I want to foster. So I recently told somebody that their email signature was not had a link in it that they forgot to attach the link. It was just click here for more. It was just words. So they don't know who I am, but I interjected and helped them out.
You know, you're doing God's work, Nathan.
Exactly. All of this was a riff on that I shaved my beard.
Yeah.
That's how we got here. That was fast. But yes, I am doing God's work. Beard or no beard.
Beard or no beard.
But it's weird with no beard. It's like I'm feeling all these breezes that I didn't know were there. My pillow is softer than I remember.
So what do you got on tap for tonight?
So a couple of shout outs. I'll start with this and then move to the main event. Because of a frozen frog, I was drawn to the recent edition of Christianity Today. It's a long story that I'm just not going to explain. You'll have to ask me about it some other time, but
Okay.
no time for that. Moving on. But opened it up, got the magazine today. I'm kind of a recent subscriber to Christianity Today. Still a little bit nervous about it. All ecumenical and stuff, but
Yeah.
opened it up to an article that I think I'd recommend just as a piece of meat to chew on, a little bit of a challenge. Name of the article is "The Devils in the Details of Deconstruction."
Okay.
Subtitle: "A Sinful Church Needs Reformation, Not Demolition." And man, they're like deconstruction. We talk about it a lot. This is kind of a deconstruction podcast, or at least that's a short way to talk about it.
Yeah.
But it's definitely a buzzword. And so I've already developed an allergic reaction against people who are warning against deconstruction.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times it's people with a financial interest, right? In preventing this kind of thing from happening, or just fear-based. So I started reading and had that reaction like, oh man, this is someone else saying careful about this deconstruction stuff.
Yeah. Stop asking questions.
Right. But the author is Tish Harrison Warren, who I know from a couple of really good books. One of them is The Liturgy of the Ordinary, and she has a regular column in Christianity Today that's just life-giving most of the time. So
really?
I gave her a chance, and definitely still had that reaction like, man, I don't know. Definitely did not agree with a lot of stuff in it, but just an interesting read. And maybe the main point is it's okay to point out the sin of a kind of human institution of the church. And so it's, we kind of get stuck in a discussion of terms and words sometimes. So anyway, that's an interesting read.
Yeah, recently, kind of along those lines real quick, I recently heard a podcast episode with Richard Rohr in it.
Okay.
And he was talking about how dangerous it is to try to keep people to tell people that you shouldn't criticize the church. You shouldn't, you shouldn't take things apart. Because when you do that, you're stopping the questioning, and you're stopping the doubt, and you're stopping the discovery. Because, we're humans. There's things that need to be fixed. And saying, stop asking questions, and questioning the church is wrong, that's like scary cult stuff right there.
Yeah, it is. And it seeps down into some stuff that I think we don't realize. I have a really close friend who grew up in the Bible Belt, but completely not believing parents, and was, as happens in the Bible Belt and everywhere, would go to a friend's house, have a sleepover, and then go to church in the morning with the friend.
Yep.
And if you come with no background and then go to Sunday school anywhere, but stereotypically in the Bible Belt, you're going to encounter a story, and your reaction as a kid is going to be like, what? What are you talking about?
Yeah.
And so that's his reaction was that. And the Sunday school teacher basically said like that same thing. Don't ask questions. This is not the place for that. And, Sunday school teachers, they're not prepared for who knows who was teaching that class. Poor person. But
yeah.
But the fact that that's our first reaction, or in that case, drove this guy away completely. He was like, that's a place where they do not, like, it's fear that causes you to say, don't ask those questions.
Yeah.
Because it means you don't have answers to those questions.
Yeah.
Or you don't think you do. So, yeah. So Tish Harrison Warren is definitely not saying don't ask the questions, but an interesting commentary on maybe this term and what the church should do about it and that kind of thing.
Cool.
Second shout out. I've just started this. So this is I've been following this person, Bridget Eileen Rivera, for a while on social media. And she just wrote a book. It came out on my birthday, which is why I found out about it. It's called Heavy Burdens.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just intro and the first chapter in, but I would definitely encourage people to pick this up if it piques their interest. So heavy burdens, and the point of the book is to talk about ways that gay Christians, LGBTQ Christians experience harm in the church, and what should the church be doing about our kids who grow up in the church or non-Christians who are LGBTQ. As a practical approach, it's not about the merits of a biblical argument for or against anything like that, but just a practical view of what should the church be doing. And basically her opinion is it should not be causing the harm that maybe we're causing. So definitely an interesting read so far that I'd recommend.
Cool. Yeah, I haven't been reading a whole lot lately, but I'm guessing that if you're a listener of this podcast, you listen to podcasts. But I've really been enjoying kind of doing the back catalog of the Bible for Normal People.
Okay. I still haven't. You've recommended that, and multiple people have, and I haven't done it. So I'm just going to do it.
It's really good.
With
Pete Enns and Jared Bias. They tackle a lot of pretty difficult subjects sometimes, but if you liked kind of the direction that we were going with the episode with Trevor Thompson, there's a lot of good stuff on that feed in that direction. Okay. Not exactly the same, but I think Pete Enns is an Old Testament guy. He's an Old Testament scholar.
Would you say it's heavy or light or mixed?
It's mixed.
Okay, I got to know which day to listen to it on.
Yeah, it's if you're trying to plan out your day, it's kind of a crapshoot depending on what the topic is. Probably. There's a whole series of episodes called Pete Ruins Exodus for You. Like part 1.
That's funny. Right. I added it. I have to see. I just had a friend who asked for podcast recommendations, and I didn't. I feel like it would have been boastful. I don't know. What's the word for it? I didn't recommend ours. That just seems pretentious.
On, dude.
But a couple that I've really been enjoying. So I'll have to see how this stacks up.
Yeah, and I will say that if any listeners have recommendations for us to listen to podcasts, I'll take them.
Yeah. Are we heavy or light? We're kind of a mixed bag too.
Yeah, it's kind of mixed. I was telling you earlier that one of our listeners, after the Trevor episode, he's like, I'm going to need the next 5 episodes to be light and breezy, please.
Yep. We feel the same way. I think I empathize with that because sometimes we will finish one and be like, all right, let's keep it light. Let's do an easy one this time. Or we'll have a topic and we'll be like, yeah, maybe that's for a day when it's more sunny outside and things are going well. So,
right.
I get that. So I wanted to talk. So this is. Let's get down to the heavy stuff now. Enough light.
All right.
Enough breeze. Just heavy all the way. We're not here to. It's not pillows. We're weightlifting and hard stuff. So I've been doing a lot of thinking, and a big thing that I was going through as we started this podcast and before that, for my the journey that I'm on, was this transition that I was making. So grew up in the Church of Christ, grew up in one specific tradition, Christian college, Christian family, very faithful church attender, used to be 3 times a week until the norm was lowered down to 2. Then I did the same thing. But I kind of had this idea maybe around college and before that really what was at the core of Christianity was understanding the Bible correctly so that I would believe the correct things. So my world had me in it, kind of in the middle, but I knew that it wasn't supposed to be in the middle. And it had God in it, and then it had the Word, which was kind of the link between me and God.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew somewhere in there, mostly because it's in the Bible, that the Spirit is there to kind of help me out with that. Help me understand the Bible correctly so I can know the right things about God. And so a lot of the catalyst that I went through and what I've been working on is this, when I finally realized I don't have a relationship with God at all.
Yeah.
But I want that really bad. I really want to know Christ. I want to follow God, not just stalk God on Facebook or know weird things about him, even though I've never interacted. So fast forward to now, and I've kind of added this. My world has taken a different shape, my world map, how I relate to religion and Christianity and God. And so that kind of, for me, at the top is God. And then there are all these ways that are different pillars or paths to relate to God. So I still have a very high view of the Word, and that's very important to me, even though there's lots of agreement and disagreement and questions I have about what is it or what isn't the Bible. But I've added to that, we've talked a lot about on the show, even the world.
Yeah.
Nature and observation and scientific discovery, and even just the things you learn in life, the Word and the world. I'm someone who really is attracted to historical Christian thought, so I add to that the church. And for me, the church is like you and neighbors who are believers, but also all Christians for all time who have been writing songs and asking questions and reading the Bible in different ways and kind of building this thing up and working on this thing together. Word, world, church, and then the Spirit, which is this, maybe you could call that inspiration or the part of God who is working in all these other things. So there's a lot of overlap. So that's kind of where I am right now, is I'm curious about all of these things because they're all kind of new to me. What does it mean to read, I don't know, church fathers or or what does the world have to teach that I haven't been listening to, that kind of thing. But as I've been working on this relationship with God, one thing that has become really clear, like maybe the most clear to me, has been a complete new perspective on the priorities that I grew up with in the Church of Christ, the priorities that nobody ever said this is the most important thing to me. But on accident, I learned that because it was what all the sermons were about, or it was what we focused on in the Bible.
Sure.
And so what I wanted to talk about today is the worldview. If you've grown up Christian and you're listening to sermons now, or you're reading the Bible, you're always making a choice about what jumps out to you, and you're reading with your cultural lens. That's something that's hard to get away from. But this idea that the world is kind of our enemy, that we are kind of this endangered species called Christian who are in this very hostile environment. And so we have some defenses given to us, like the Bible and the Holy Spirit, and each other, so that we can survive the attacks of the world, maybe even launch our own aggressions to see if we can gain some territory, but that there's this struggle between the world and between the church.
Yep.
And there are verses that talk about this. Don't be defiled. Don't follow the pattern of this world, in the world and not of the world. But the more that I listen to people who have a relationship with God, whether it's people I'm reading wherever they were in time, or people who I've met who exhibit this behavior, they have a lot more of a sense of peace about this topic. They aren't filled with fear. They're filled with faith or confidence. And so I just can't stop seeing this thing where some of these verses that we've used, we maybe accidentally did the wrong thing. So we've both heard sermons recently that that had this kind of unspoken idea that ideas out there in the world are dangerous and so you shouldn't interact with them, or people out there in the world are dangerous and you shouldn't interact with them. And even more kind of embarrassing for people like us who grew up in the Church of Christ, we know about, not only are we suspicious of, pop culture or the world around us, but we're very suspicious even of other Christians or people who claim to be Christians.
Mm-hmm.
And so I have memories in my hometown of our church refusing to work with a Baptist church to help a fire or a flood effort, right? So no, we will not do good in the name of Christ with another group of Christians.
Yeah, I even got the vibe when I was a kid that, or not just a kid, but I got this vibe that there's always us, and the world was always like the general term for anybody who's not a Church of Christer.
Right.
But it's almost like the people who are other flavors of Christian were kind of even worse than people who weren't Christians at all. Like,
right.
They're more dangerous because a false teacher is like a wolf in sheep's clothing. You can't identify them always, but a wolf, you can see that's a wolf, because they're Muslim or who knows what. But this guy, he says he loves Christ.
He says he's a sheep. Yeah.
Yeah, he says he's a sheep, but he's really saying that women should be able to preach. That's not right.
Right. Yeah, and when you're in it, it's hard to see it.
Yep.
And the sermons are not, you should be afraid, or we stand on a very shaky foundation.
Right.
But in between the lines, that ends up happening. Like, oh man, we can't, our youth group can't mix with this church because they use instruments, or, we can't team up with this church. And I've lived in multiple towns where this is the case, even the churches of Christ. I'm sure there are towns where there are churches of Christ that get together and can put maybe their differences aside, but where I've lived, the churches of Christ exist because of each other. So they're not even looking at atheists or Muslims or, God forbid, Catholics or something. They're looking at each other for their identity, like, we don't do that, or this church did this, so we split off from them, so this is the true one. And that's just an infinite, unending cycle. That's what fundamentalism does, is it says, these are the fundamentals. People who don't agree with this are not us. But as soon as you have a big enough group, your fundamental is going to shrink even more so that you can say, well, this is the real, right? We're the real ones. Yep. So from an outside view, it's really sad, but from the inside, it's very difficult to see. And I talk about this a lot, where we think that what we need is logos meaning logic, words, information. We hope to appeal to ethos, like saying the Bible says this, or the Pope says this, or the president says this.
Mm-hmm.
But my personal belief is that much of our decisions are actually pathos, which is emotion, but also just your gut, your identity. And we grew up with this Christianity that was in a battle against culture. And it's hard to imagine a Christianity that didn't exist like that. But we're talking about the 70s and 80s and 90s, when in the United States, Christianity started to define itself as an opposition force to feminism or sexual liberation of the 60s or whatever. So we do all of this work to be careful to not be defiled or to have the right beliefs. But I don't think that looks like Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
And it's hard that we've gotten so far without, I think, asking those questions. Does this look like Jesus? And I think we've gotten so far, actually, that we are actually of the world, but not in the world.
Yeah.
And we don't realize how of the world we are because we're not in the world. So the things that we care about right now are money, power, the things that agitate people politically in the world are the things that agitate us as well in churches. Mm-hmm. We're just not mixing with those people. We're not in it.
Yeah.
And when we were called to be transformed and not conform to the pattern of this world, I think that we got the wrong message. I think that we thought that if we have really strong defenses, if we know which movies to not see or books to not read, that will protect, I don't know, our children from being defiled by the world.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think that's what happens. I think kids grow up and read books.
Yeah.
And if we don't equip them with sound logic and show them what's out there, I think a lot of people fall away for that reason. But we also, even if that didn't happen, our core mission is not to defend ourselves from the world. Our core mission is to be Jesus in the world, to be the active, living God in the world, the representative of Christ. But if Christ is fighting the world, all of that energy is going in completely the wrong direction.
I got a question for you. What is the definition of holy, Nathan?
Separate. Yeah, separate and special.
Set apart, separate.
But what you're missing is for a purpose.
Okay.
Because my mom, apologies to my mom. My mom has some holy china ware, right? In a hutch, which is I've been joking because I'm newly married. Like, when do we get a hutch? I assume that's is that 10 years in?
Still don't have a hutch.
For the stuff that is holy, right? A hutch is where you put the stuff that is so special that you actually will never use it. But that's too far, right? The church has become the fine china in the hutch that's so holy that it's just for looking at, and that it's not even coming out on Thanksgiving or when the president comes over or whatever you're saving it for. Holy is set apart for a purpose. And we have the model for what our purpose is supposed to be. Your attitude should be, that of Christ, who came to the earth and moved to a cave so that he would never have to interact with sinners or accidentally smell bad or eat the wrong food. No, that's our model is the most holy, who came down out of a birth canal. Is that the word for it?
Yeah.
Yeah, I just realized that's a weird term.
A word for it.
Any other suggestions?
No, that's good.
Into a manger, right?
Right.
And then he never stopped getting dirty after that. His first miracle was at a party. Yeah. And his disciples were kind of ne'er-do-wells, and the people he hung out with are what people would call sinners and betrayers and prostitutes and
problematic people,
women, children, right? So he was constantly getting his feet and hands dirty in life. He was accused of doing that too much on more than one occasion. And then he says his counter to that is what makes you pure is not what goes into you, it's what comes out of you.
Mm-hmm.
But you tune into a sermon on Sunday, and what you're going to hear is the opposite of that.
Oh, yeah.
It's going to be, don't let that impurity come into you. But we're not talking about what the experience of someone is who is listening to Christians and what we're saying, what's coming out of us right now. Whether it's distrust and hatred of the foreigner, or this worship of individualism that is manifested in rights worship, right?
Yep.
Of the individual over the group, or whatever it is. Even just that fear of don't read those books, don't talk to those people, don't listen to that show. It's this world that's built on fear, and that's built to not let the impurity in.
Yeah. There's so much emphasis, and always has been, about exactly that, building a wall around yourself, basically.
Yeah. And we know from Sunday school that we're supposed to evangelize and be in, again, like I said, we know we're supposed to be in the world, but not of the world.
Right.
But I think that focus on identifying ourselves on one side of a cultural battle and caring about believing the correct thing and our kids believing the correct thing has taken priority over the actual gospel mission of the church. You know, you tune in to Jesus' sermons, and when he says don't conform to the pattern of the world, what he means is don't care about how much money somebody has. That's the pattern of the world. Don't just keep to yourselves. That's the pattern of the world. And the analogies he uses are exactly what I said about like getting into the world. He says, you are the salt of the earth. And the idea is that you are like spread out. You're not the salt lick of the earth, all consolidated in one spot to attract, I don't know, people to it. It's you're out in there providing this different thing, or you're light. And don't just build a church building with a steeple and hide that light under it, under this cover.
Yeah.
Jesus is the ultimate model of incarnation, and we have this church that's trying to do the opposite.
Yeah, I think the priorities aspect of it is huge. Because, like you said, most Christians, especially if they've been going to church for a while, fundamentalist church, whatever that is, you know the things you're supposed to do. Like, you know, kind of that you get this checklist in the back of your mind, at least I do. And, you know, one of those things is like tell people about God and bring them to Christ, that kind of thing. But then you also know that you're supposed to do this other stuff, like help the widows and help the homeless and the poor and the sick and all that. But we end up prioritizing the keep yourself spotless from the world, from being polluted by the world. We prioritize that so high that we end up not doing some of the other stuff that in the quote unquote dirtier areas of life, because I got to keep myself clean. And one of the best examples I can think of, just off the top of my head, was my kind of missions mentor when I was at OC and after. Clyde Antoine told me this story about a guy who was a missionary to an island somewhere in the South Pacific. So this guy goes to this tribe, and all the women are topless all the time, and women who wore shirts were seen as trying to be more like Western women, like the movie stars, and they were the prostitutes. Like if you saw a woman with a shirt, she was a prostitute, ironically, right, from our perspective. And so the missionary went along with it as the culture was. But he sent some pictures back to his supporting congregation in the States, and all the little ladies are like, "Oh my word, these poor people, they're living in sin because they're topless." And so they got together this big fundraiser. They got all these T-shirts for them, shipped them off to this island, and they're like, "What are we gonna do with these?" You know, they put them all. They put all the shirts on, took a picture, took the shirts off, and used them as rags.
Yeah, because
the people were in the States were so concerned with this not looking like the world, not being polluted by the world, and that they kind of missed the point a little bit. And I think we do that a lot ourselves, like getting wrapped around the axle about language in movies. Like, just don't go see the movie. Instead of complaining about it, just don't go see it. And instead of talking about God, we talk about what you shouldn't be doing.
I think some of those repercussions of that are, I mean, I think about this a lot as far as raising kids, because I've got a young kid that I know this is going to be a challenge. How am I going to do this? And certain kids are going to react to the forbidden fruit part of that, right? But I I think that we have an idea about kids that you really can protect them all the way from, scary things like ideas and and information. But I think what really happens is you'll just protect them from that as long as you have control over that, and no longer.
Yeah.
And so I think there's value in protecting kids and myself and people from all kinds of things. Not everything is beneficial, but at the same time, equipping people to handle ideas and also not accidentally teaching people that the enemy are the people around us.
Yeah.
I grew up, it would have been unspeakable for us to meet with some of the other churches of Christ, let alone Baptists, let alone Catholics, let alone atheists, let alone Muslims. But those people are the world. They're out there.
Yeah.
And I think that at the core of that worldview, at the core of that map, that there is an enemy out there that is made out of humans. I think at the very center of that is fear and insecurity. And so what you get is ideas that are dangerous. We've talked about how you'll dismiss science, right? Instead of engaging with it. And as you do that, what kids are learning is that the way that they interact with the world is that it's warfare. And that they're the dangers.
It's very us versus them.
It's us versus them. My story about my neighbor Jody, who was an atheist, so I was like against him, right? Or my neighbor Megan, who believed in evolution. Nobody taught me this. My parents would have been horrified if they knew this, but I knew as an 8, 9, and 10-year-old that they are the enemy, and that my job is to either correct them or be against them. But the opposite of danger, fear, enemies, slippery slopes, is faith.
Yeah.
I think faith is confidence that when Jesus says, "I have overcome the world," that's what he means, or that the ideas that I believe in are strong enough to withstand scrutiny or challenge. And also, love does not exist when your enemy is a human being or even a human culture. Your interactions will not be loving. It's not possible. And there's not any humility in there. But all of these things are what Jesus embodied and what this whole thing is supposed to be about. It's not do not interact, don't listen, don't read. It's you should be very different when you interact and when you listen and when you read and when you go places. You should be the salt. You should be the light. But you shouldn't be afraid. You have no reason to be afraid. I think you know that you're in a church like this if you don't interact with other Christians, or you don't even know other Christians, or know what does my neighbor who's a Baptist or a Catholic or an Anglican, what do they have in common with me, or what are their goals and missions? And that happens because someone somewhere along the lines was afraid of you talking to those people. We're Christians.
So, okay, couple things. This makes me think of are you familiar with how the Amish do this thing when they're 16 years old?
Schadenfreude?
Rumspringa.
Thank you. Yeah.
Schadenfreude.
I got it. I think that was it.
I'm going to have to bleep that one out, you know that, right?
Oh, no.
Just kidding.
Scheiße. Wait.
Rumspringa. That's a bad one. Rumspringa. When they hit roughly 16, they get I forget all the details, but I'll link in the show notes, right? Roughly, they go out and they have about a year. They give them some money and say, go out into the world and sow your wild oats or whatever. And it's to show it. The idea is to show them how horrible the world is, and how kind of like a Scared Straight program.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah.
And some kids are like, this is way better than living on a farm with no electricity. I'm doing this for the rest of my life. And the community is like, good, that's where you need to be. We don't want you here, sort of. And there's more to it, but I just think that's an interesting way to go at it. Like you were talking about, like, how do you handle your son? And I'm right in the heat of that right now. My son's 14.
Mm-hmm.
And my daughter's 19, and so she's kind of she's gone. She's lost it.
Yeah.
No, she's a fantastic kid though.
She liked those electric lights in the city and the
right. Yeah.
colorful clothing.
But like my son is 14, and he's going through things 14-year-olds go through, but in a world so much different than when I was a kid.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's this balance between letting him watch an R-rated movie once in a while, if it's an okay one, or and trying to like expose him to things slowly to get him to realize that there's part of being in the world but still being a light, and that sometimes it's a hard balance. But often when I try to, and anytime I drop off the kids for school, when they're getting out of the car, I just try to say, be a light. And they know what that means. Just be a light in the darkness. Because no matter how dark the darkness gets, you turn on the light and the darkness is gone. And so it's a really difficult thing. And when it gets to churches, there's like another, it's kind of the same thing and a different thing. Because with churches, there's a built-in kind of requirement or desire or need, even if it's unspoken, to be the only church most of the time. And so it's this...
You mean be the most correct one? Or
be the most correct one, or be the one that most people go to. Like, we want people to come into the town and go, I want to go to a church. And they want, the church wants them to be the only one, the only choice, the only real choice.
Yeah. Okay.
So if you want your church to be the only real choice, the only tenable choice, it's going to encourage you to ramp up the separation between you and others. Now, if you're in a church that's like kind of ecumenical and accepting of other churches and things like that, that's not really a problem. But if you're all about being the one, the only one, you're going to do all kinds of things to separate yourself. And like you said, to the point where these people need help, but I'm not going to help the Baptists because whatever reason. And therefore these people don't get the good help, or the two churches, work at odds with each other because maybe the Baptist church is giving them all water and they need food, but the other church, the Church of Christ, comes along with water. It's like, no, they need food, not water. They get water.
Yeah.
And, that kind of thing. And so it's this desire that we have as humans to be separate and apart and to be different and to have this other us versus them thing is so strong. And I really wish that, that's one thing that I'm loving so much about just not even plugging into a church, but just pulling away from the fundamentalist notions that I grew up with, is just this freedom to say, holy cow, there are other Christians out there and we can work together and I'm not so alone. It's not this scary thing. Yeah.
The same thing that I've been going through is that pulling away and seeing my beliefs from the outside, or seeing that system from the outside. And certainly a root of it is you only go to heaven if you believe the correct things. If you believe the slightly wrong thing, then it's eternal damnation for you. Mm-hmm. Makes you want to be very cautious and careful, and then not mix with the other Christians, then not the neighbors, and et cetera. It's about being correct, which again is not the model of Jesus, but I think it turns into... It starts there at this desire to be the only one, or the best one, or the correct one, or believe the correct things, or even do the correct things to get to heaven. that causes you to build these walls. But once the walls are built and they've been there for a generation or two or three, what happens now is that you're not even fighting a real enemy outside.
Mm-hmm.
What the fear of is now is just a complete void of the unknown.
Mm.
It's like I didn't even see this movie. M. Night Shyamalan. The Village. Yeah. Right. I worked in theaters when it happened, so I think I know what it's about, but I've never seen it from start to finish. And he's the kind of guy who you kind of have to see it chronologically. But it's a village built with no knowledge that the world is around them, and so it's fear. I think it's fear that keeps them in. Yeah. And I think both of us have experienced somewhat what it's like to be there. We don't know why those walls were there, but we know they're important not to cross. So much so that it may have to do with like heaven and hell issues. And so what we start to do is imagine a really scary world out there, and we want to defend our kids against it. So what we preach about is watch out there.
Mm-hmm.
And so what we're left with are the kind of people who are going to walk by the side of the road and give as much clearance to whoever's laying there bloody as possible so that we don't get dirty.
Mm-hmm.
And what we don't have is this example of a God who didn't stay holy, but did everything in his power to come among us, and then kept doing that, even though he was in the unacceptable places or talking to the people he shouldn't be talking to. And then his priorities were not about keeping that purity or not letting your ideas be challenged.
Mm-hmm.
They were to have your eyes wide open. Don't shut your eyes so you don't see what's out there. Pay attention, starting with yourself. See if there's planks in your eye, because that's where you're going to find them.
Mm-hmm.
And that should be okay as your group or your individual, to look at your problems and talk about your problems and acknowledge your problems and work on your problems. But then take that out so that you can see the world, because the world is going to fall into this pattern of the love of money and worship of money, or the love of war and worship of war, or the love of power and worship of power. And you should not conform to that pattern.
Yeah.
And the world is going to tell you that, or even religion is going to tell you that you need to not taste and not touch and not handle. But that's not the command that we were given. That's not the example we were given.
Yeah.
And then to not fear. And if I know this from youth group and also from a quick Google, but do not be afraid or fear not or do not fear is scattered throughout the Bible.
Oh yeah. Lots of times.
And we are told, like, we have already won this battle. We believe in truth that doesn't change. And so we have nothing to be afraid of. And so that confidence means, like Sky Jatani's example of the trapeze artist, we can fly through the air and know that we're going to be caught. We can let go of that world that we're building of us versus them. Or we can even see the patterns of culture wars that that happen around us, and we don't have to subscribe to that.
Yeah, but so many Christians end up dealing in fear. And that's one thing that I never really sat down and thought about until Trump came along and things started ratcheting up in the U.S. just politically, with the difference in the divide that's just gotten worse and worse and worse and seems to just be getting worse. I never really thought through how powerful a motivator fear was. I mean, the GOP seems to be, like, their currency is fear. Anything comes along, you got to be afraid of it. People that want in the country, be afraid of them. Somebody who wants to have kids not killed at school, be afraid of them. They're going to take your guns. All these things. It's just fear, 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 fear. Yep, so many of these people claim to follow Christ, and like you said, we've won the war. You know, where is the lack of fear, and why is there so much of it? And it's almost, I mean, from being someone from the outside who's not in that bathing in fear world, I kind of don't know what to do, because I have this feeling like I'm not afraid of my rights getting taken away, because I'm living for something else. But my neighbor, quite literally, is afraid of their rights getting taken away, and so like stockpile guns and stockpile gold bars and canned food or who knows what, and they're just driven by that. And then it gets into all this conspiracy theory stuff because you're afraid, and then you think this is going to fix things, and on and on and on. And it's not. I mean, I'm using politics as an example here, but it's also the same problem is there with churches that are so afraid of the outside world that they would prefer to huddle together and kind of like, don't open the windows, they might know that we're in here. You should get that vibe.
Yeah.
So I mean, what do we do?
Well, we know the foundation that, like, we were told, do not be afraid. We were told Christ has overcome. We were told that faith is the opposite of shrinking back, right? We're not those who shrink back and are destroyed. Or what, we're more than conquerors because there's nothing that can separate us from this.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing out there that's going to separate us from what we have, the love of Christ Jesus.
Mm-hmm. So
then the next step, I think, is to take that confidence and then it's not the next step. The first step is to do what Jesus did. That's our entire mission.
Yeah.
And that starts with spending time with other people. And it could be, depending on where you are, it could be with fundamentalist Christians are the other people you need to spend time with to understand, because they're not our enemies either, or whoever those people are. But Christians should have the complete confidence to spend time with other Christians, but also to break through all these patterns that our world has where we don't. Something that I love about church is that a lot of churches you'll find a multi-generational group of people. That's one barrier we've broken through successfully in a lot of churches, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't happen everywhere for sure, but that's a box we've broken through. So now let's break through socioeconomic boxes and hang out with people who don't live in our town or our neighborhood or dress like us or drive cars like us. And then let's break through the race box and realize when we have racial division in our towns or counties or states, we have that here where the makeup of our town racially is not the same as the makeup of our church. So let's spend time with those people. And then maybe we won't be so scared to break through the belief box, where just like Jesus, we can spend time not only with people who believe slightly different than us, like the Pharisees and Sadducees, or the people who have more or less mature faith than us, but we can also hang out with Samaritans who explicitly believe a different thing than us, or Gentiles who completely disbelieve or don't believe at all the things that we believe in. Like Jesus was doing that. He was spending time, and it was God spending time with us, but we see it in Jesus spending time in his community, and then he loved those people. You can't get to the core of that command or that gospel without like actually being around them and not thinking they're the enemy. But he came spending time, then he loved people, and then he served people, even those bad people that we're talking about. And then he went so far in lowering himself, being among those people, loving them, and raising people above him, that he went so far to be willing to die for them. And then he taught us to give to people who take from you, to go the extra mile when the government mandates that you go one, to forgive as many times as you are requested, to have mercy, to not judge, to love people, to be careful about not just giving so you look good, or it's all there, how to interact with the world. And what it is not is that the world is our enemy and that we need to be careful.
But when your entire foundation is believing the right thing and how that is everything, then I'm afraid that you're not going to have the courage to spend time with those people, because, and I think that kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier about how I always felt that other churches were more dangerous than atheists, for example. Mm-hmm. Because if I spend time with somebody who doesn't agree with all of my beliefs, then I might have my beliefs changed. And that's scary.
Yeah.
Because if you're anchoring everything on those beliefs, you're not going to want to even entertain doubt. And I think that's exactly what I ran into with my family, to be brutally honest, when we started this podcast. I said, "Hey family, here's a link to this podcast I'm starting. It's going to be really cool. Here you're going to find out what I really think about some stuff." And the immediate response from everybody in my family was, "Not going to listen to it." I'm like, "But don't you don't want to know what I think?" And they're like, "I kind of don't."
I would rather not. Yeah,
I'd rather not, because for one, they're afraid for me. Once again, fear. I think they're also afraid for themselves, because they might learn something that, like the thing with Trevor, the episode with Trevor. Some people are not going to want to listen to that episode because they are afraid that if they learn something about the Bible's origins different than they thought, then everything crumbles around that, and that's scary. So I think you're right about spending time with people to engender that compassion and empathy for them. But I'm not sure that that's likely to happen unless you try to pull back from this idea that that belief is the only thing that matters.
Yeah, I have a lot of empathy for people who have that reaction.
Yeah.
It feels like someone's asking you to jump out of a plane without a parachute.
Yeah, yeah.
Because you've never gotten anywhere close to that amount of freedom or whatever. And that happens from growing up in this system that has kept building the walls, or maybe doesn't even know why the walls are there, but kept reinforcing them. I think the first responsibility is for church leaders, like shepherds or pastors or preachers or leaders in churches, should be thinking about this and looking at the gospel. And if following the gospel is a risk to that wall that you've been building, and that it might make it topple, then you need to start taking some of those bricks out of your walls.
Mm-hmm.
Just asking people to jump through them is going to be traumatic. It's like training a tomato and then taking away the trellis that they've been growing on. They're going to collapse because they never built that foundation that's strong enough to stand without that support. But ultimately, I think adults who are in that stage, they were fed milk their entire lives, and they have never learned to be able to handle meat. And that's a crazy thing to say about your mom, because that's not true. I know that's not true. She can handle the meatiest of meat in the narrowest of
that's
areas.
If you, yeah, I get what you're saying, but I mean, that's kind of, if you, to carry the analogy probably way too far, it's like the kind of meat you're talking about, because do you consider doubts and asking really hard and possibly really controversial questions, is that meat? Or is, like the way I was brought up, like the more you know about the Bible, that's the more meat.
Yeah.
Once back again to the knowing and the believing.
Yeah, and I think I have a sense of betrayal, because I think that I was accidentally taught, maybe by elders who I respected, that what meat is just understanding the Bible more correctly. But when Paul talks about meat, he's not talking about that, because the understanding the stuff the most correct is what he actually calls milk. Because he's talking about the correct understanding of what does it mean to, I don't know, eat meat sacrificed to an idol. The meat that he's talking about is having the wisdom to know that it's more than just the right and wrong beliefs, and to move past that towards becoming the kind of people who move from the legalism of beliefs and right and wrong to relationship with Christ, which should move you to action in your community, which is a continuous process that leads you to have less and less fear, right? So a Christian who grapples with meat is going to be able to see when somebody is reacting out of fear and help guide them out of that. But these terms are going to help anyone who's stuck in that, to just call them, I feel like I'm calling them names that they're stuck in milk Christianity, but we're missing the gospel. So when you make everything equally a priority and you try to get everything 100% right, you're going to fail the test of Christianity, because God crashes into that and says, no, I actually care which things you get right. And you know what? I'd rather you get some things wrong if it meant that you focused on what my priorities are. And the answer to what my priorities are is Christ, Jesus Christ. So pay attention. Who does Jesus see? Who does Jesus talk to? Where does he go? What is he afraid of? And how are you like that and not like that as a community and as a person?
Yeah, I feel like I was raised with the spirit of the Old Testament, God, quote unquote. It's the same God, but you know what I mean. With the spirit of the Old Testament in the world of the New Testament. Meaning, in the Old Testament, it was very, life and death. If you touch the ark, even though you're trying to steady it, you're dead. And if you do the sacrifice the wrong way, you're dead. Or if you lie to your parents, you're dead. High stakes for holding the law exactly right. And so that vibe and that spirit was part of my life growing up and part of church, as far as that's how you have to approach God, because God wants you to do it just the right way.
The whole Jesus project is saying, I know that that's how you read those verses. You missed the whole point. Here's some verses that are there. Not I'm giving you a new thing. Hey, let's go back and look at those verses. What was God trying to do here? And so that's, why he says he's here to fulfill the law. And he points back and says, this is the kind of God. This is who is doing this. This is what it means. And it's the opposite of what you've made it. And we put it all back in the box and made it back into the old thing, back into the...
Right. So even though the Old Testament is full of people trying to follow God's laws precisely, Jesus came along, and there are multiple times when he was like, the Sabbath stuff is a great example. He was constantly breaking the Sabbath because a guy needed healed, or people were hungry. And so Jesus came along, and he got it. He understood how it was supposed to go. He understood that people in need were more important than some law about not picking grain on the Sabbath or something. And I feel like I was raised in a world that didn't get that part of the story. Because Jesus never once said, blessed are you who follow all the laws just perfectly. He love God and love people. And I've always been told, love God equals doing all the stuff the right way.
Right.
But that completely ignores the salvation, the grace, the caring for people, and acknowledging, to be honest, just straight up acknowledging the fact that Jesus was constantly doing stuff again, quote unquote, again. I keep saying quote unquote. He kept doing stuff against the law, against the law and the prophets, for the right reasons.
Yeah, it was against those boxes that the religious people had formed and were teaching to other people, the burdens that they were putting on people. And so when God crashes in, the people who get the most upset are the religious people, and we are the most like them in church. So it's important for us to listen to what God is telling them and what they're doing and what Jesus just can't stand about that. And so he talks about those laws, but when he says woe to you, and talks about not the culture war that's happening in Rome, because woe to you who, I don't know, Romans were doing horrible cultural things. Woe to you who worship the emperor. Woe to you who, delight in violence against other slaves and who uphold this system. His woes were specifically for the people who were the God insiders, but who took the focus off of God's priorities and onto following the law exactly right and then adding on to that. And so when he says, blessed are you, the kind of community he calls us to be are the poor and poor in spirit, and people who grieve, and people who have this desire for righteousness to happen when they see it not happening, and to be merciful, and to be peacemakers and pure in heart. And somehow in all of that, what we focused on is, blessed are you who are persecuted, and we kind of delight if the world doesn't like us for not liking them.
Yeah.
But if we lose the purpose to be the salt and light of the earth, the purpose is to love others, even our enemies. The purpose is to put others above ourselves and to serve. We're just holy and set apart in the China hutch. We have completely lost connection to the purpose. And so we are salt who has lost its saltiness.
Yeah.
And just like what I think should happen to those dishes in the China hutch, should throw them out and stomp on them. That's the reaction.
You need a good Greek wedding.
Yeah, that'd be cathartic. God's reaction to the church, who separates itself to be as correct as possible, is, I have no use for you. I'm going to throw you out. I will spit you out of my mouth. I will stomp you. You're not salt, you're dirt now, because you're not out there providing the flavor.
Well, I keep coming back in my mind to James 1:27. The religion that God our Father accepts as pure and faultless is this: first, to look after orphans and widows in the distress, and then to keep oneself from being polluted by the world. We have those opposite. And we think that those are connected. That if I want to avoid being polluted, I've got to avoid the orphans and the widows and the homeless and the drug addicts and etc. But it's not pure if you don't do the first part. If you're not helping the people who need help.
Polluted is the way of the world is to not care about orphans and widows.
Exactly. It's a dichotomy setting up.
And the next verse, there's a chapter, but who cares? The next verse is, and don't be polluted in the way that the world will pollute you, and care about power and money and prestige.
Mm-hmm.
What we turn that into is don't believe the incorrect thing. But we have churches out there that believe all the quote-unquote correct things, but that they are completely polluted by the world. They have sexual abuse scandals that they're covering up. They care about money. They care about, they're capitalist to the core or individualist, or they, care more about protecting their right to bear a gun than they do the homeless people outside or whatever it is. That is being polluted by the world. It's who you are and what you care about and what your priorities are and what idols you worship are the same as the people around you.
Mm-hmm. Just slapping a Jesus sticker on something nasty doesn't make it good.
it didn't in Jesus's time,
Mm-hmm.
and it doesn't now. The pattern of Jesus is so in complete opposition to fear and to a war against the world. It couldn't be starker.
I think that all the way back to the beginning of the episode, you're talking about that article about deconstruction. I think that's at the core of a lot of the reason so many people are going through this right now, is that they're seeing the church, and it's just becoming more and more obvious. They're seeing the church, and by church I mean all Christians in America, really, of all flavors. They're seeing the church being so much like the worst people that we can imagine, like in a very literal way. So much like them,
And nothing like Jesus.
and nothing like Jesus.
And you can be an adult like me or you and read the gospel and be surprised.
Yeah.
We went to Christian colleges. We grew up with Christian families and strong, what I thought, biblical knowledge. But I'll open up the gospel and be like, "What?
Yeah.
This is Jesus? I want to be like that. I want to know that guy. I want to be like that. I want my life to look like that." And then what you get is someone saying, like, why doesn't my church look like that?
Yeah. Which leads people to start picking things apart, and then they start thinking, well, if my church doesn't look like this, then is there any validity to anything?
Yeah.
And get a lot of people leaving.
Or the more I want to be like this Jesus person and fail at, stumble at it, but the more people are angry at me in my church, right?
Yeah.
For saying the wrong thing, or believing the wrong thing, or interacting with the wrong people, or accepting the wrong people, or loving the wrong people. It's such a weird position to be in, to find yourself getting to know Jesus more and more. And that's a scary thing for a Christian to,
Yeah, I feel like a lot of us are in this weird situation where I want to be more like Jesus, and in order to do that, I can't go to church where I used to go to church. Or some people think, anywhere at all that they can find. If I want to be like Jesus, I need to go to the Black Lives Matter protest, or insert thing that church doesn't like.
Yeah.
And that's where I have to go to be like Jesus. That's sad. And it breaks my heart. And that's one thing I think a lot of people don't understand about people going through this deconstruction, is that it's not that we're like, yeah, finally got rid of church. I can do what I want now.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not. It's about, and that's why people who do go through this are people like you and me, who are super involved, super dedicated, because we started realizing that we're the anomaly. It seems like. I mean, not that we're perfect by any stretch, but.
And who want nothing more than to, like, bring our group with us, or show this amazing, like, guys, look at this thing. This is, have you seen this?
Yeah.
Jesus, it's amazing.
Did you know that was in the Bible?
Yeah. Are we allowed to talk
There's
about
like
that?
4 whole books
Are we allowed
about
to
him.
talk about what's in the Bible? And what I see is this, I call it a closed church, or a closed gospel. And I think that ultimately we read all the things and try to believe the correct thing, but we really still think that what goes in you is what defiles you. Yeah. What comes into our body, what we accept in this building, who we accept in this building, that's what makes or breaks, I guess, your salvation. And just imagine a world with open churches who believe that it's what comes out of church into society is that what defiles us. Mm-hmm. So let's be careful about what we're projecting into the world, what we're saying, because that is what makes us unclean as Christians. And those open churches, imagine them bringing up people to grapple with and hang out with and love the kids in their elementary school who believe differently than them, and to come home with those questions and understand that there's meat out there even if you're not ready for it, and then elders who are grappling with that meat, right? And who have become more and more like Jesus, and who therefore have complete confidence and no fear about someone coming in or someone going out and talking to the wrong people or eating the wrong thing or whatever it is.
Well, it's good stuff. It's hard, especially when you're no longer in a position that you can influence the people that you feel like you need to influence. But
yeah,
I'm just trying to do my best where I can, trying to follow God.
Yep, I'm still level 1 out of 100 or more newbie beginning Jesus follower, but with this frustration at these structures that could have done such a better job.
Yeah,
turning zeros into ones into, let's get into the tens and see what happens. But instead, following that path has meant people are afraid for me or afraid to talk to me, one of the two.
What a fun place to be.
Yeah. We kept it light.
Yeah. I know that I'm going to go to sleep thinking about the training a tomato. Because when you train a tomato, I immediately had this vision of you in your backyard with a leash around a tomato and like with like big fangs, and you're like getting it to roll over, and it was like barking and growling at you.
Sit, tomato.
Wasn't there there's like a really bad horror movie in the 80s called Attack of the Killer Tomatoes?
Attack of the Killer Tomatoes. Attack of the Killer Tomatoes.
I never saw it, but every time I went into Blockbuster with my parents or Showtime Video, whatever it was,
yeah,
I always saw Attack of the Killer Tomatoes, and it looked really scary and really funny.
They'll beat you, bash you, squish you, mash you, chew you up for brunch, and finish you off for dinner or lunch.
They never let me watch it.
There must be something in it they don't want you to know.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to see if I can find that movie.
Or they just know it was just bad. It's probably just not going to be a good movie.
It's bad culture, son.
Yeah.
Oh boy. All right, man.
Well,
stick a fork in this for now.
We solved the world.
We did. I mean, people just need to not be afraid.
Yep. There you go. You're welcome.
All right. Take care.
Okay. See ya.
I thought you wanted to hear, but it only takes a whisper.
Hey, thanks for listening to Following the Fire. If you'd like to see show notes for this episode, which includes links to everything we mentioned as well as all the scriptures, head on over to followingthefire.com and just click on this episode. There's also contact information on the website. Let us know what you think about the show and if you have any suggestions for future topics. Also, please give us a review on Apple Podcasts if you could. It really helps other folks find the show. And as always, thanks to the fabulous Daniel Wheat for the theme song and the music for the episode. You can find more of his stuff on Apple Music and Spotify. See you later.
Attack of the Killer Tomatoes. Attack of the Killer Tomatoes. They'll beat you, bash you, squish you, mash you, chew you up for brunch, and finish you off for dinner or lunch. They're marching down the halls. They're crawling up the walls. They're gooey, gushy, squishy, mushy, rotten to the core. They're standing outside your door. Remember Herbert Farbage, while taking out his garbage, he turned around and he did see tomatoes hiding in his tree. Now he's just a memory. I know I'm going to miss her. A tomato ate my sister. Sacramento fell today. They're marching into San Jose. Tomatoes are on their way. The mayor is on vacation. The governor's fled the nation. The police have gone on strike today. The National Guard has run away. Tomatoes will have their day. Attack of the killer tomatoes. Attack of the killer tomatoes. They'll beat you, bash you, squish you, mash you, chew you up for brunch, and finish you off for dinner or lunch.